This episode is brought to you by our upcoming webinar, Building Responsible AI in Healthcare on June 12th. Visit thisweekhealth.com and watch for the pop-up to register today. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm lucky today to have Timothy Boettcher from AvePoint with me. Welcome to the program, Timothy.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited that you're here. We got off to a little bit of a false start. And this is all fun and games that happen sometimes when we're putting a show together. You have a really interesting background. You're Australian, love your accent. Everyone, I'm sure, loves your accent. But you're from Australia and you have this really interesting path from Australia to where you are now. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Awesome. Thanks, Drex. And yes, you're right. The accent helps me get away with a lot of, I can deliver a lot of medicine with a spoonful of sugar, right? Like
you sound really smart. That's why I think everybody go, oh, it's from Australia.
Thank you. My background's in information management and knowledge management. And to add a bit more color to that, I started my career about 20 years ago with a large web hosting provider in Australia that was doing websites that were the Australian equivalent of like MSN.com or Ticketmaster.com, those kinds of websites, technical role. But that gave me my footing in internet technology, which led to intranets. And then I spent just under a decade specializing in SharePoint business consulting, which gave me a lot of exposure to knowledge management, governance, compliance, highly regulated industries. SharePoint is a very versatile technology. So it cuts across things like obviously a big presence in healthcare and health systems, but also financial, education, public sector, and commercial organizations as well. Used to work with a lot of different vendors and consulting for things like compliance and automation and regulation. And I ended up, one of them was AvePoint, and I ended up working with them in their Singapore office, where I sort of transitioned from consulting into pre-sales and sales, and ended up leading our Tokyo office for a little bit in Japan, which was an amazing experience. And a lot of the work I did out there was related to public sector and healthcare and other kinds of regulated industries, and got a tap on the shoulder to say, well, if you like that kind of stuff, come down to the mothership in DC. So I'm residing just outside of DC now in Northern Virginia. And over those years of transitioning from technical to consulting to sort of pre-sales and sales, eventually found myself working very closely with marketing. And so since I work with sort of the product and the marketing teams and the sales teams and the implementation teams, I sort of have that cross-functional role, which has led to the go-to-market strategy lead. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
I love it. I mean, I think some of the best salespeople that I've ever met actually started off as consultants, because you ask, your questions are always sort of probing and trying to find the problem that you're solving in healthcare, or the problem that you're up against that is the thing that's really sort of the thorn that's digging into their side. So I think that's an amazing path. And so speaking about that, tell me about AvePoint. What's the problem AvePoint solves in healthcare, and how did you come to the realization that this would be a great mission?
Amazing question. And I know that your audience is very broad. You've got a big, wide spectrum of listeners. So, when we're talking tech in healthcare, for a lot of people, I think it immediately goes to the EHRs, right? And other core kind of clinical systems, which, as it should, that's a critical part of IT in healthcare. But if you're specifically, the problem that we solve for, there's another layer, which traditionally I think was a little bit seen as administrative or operational back office, but now it's really come to the forefront with AI. And that's that collaborative platforms like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, even turn back the clock a few years, the humble file shares and SharePoint on-prem, less so these days, but obviously we're a lot more cloud focused. These are the areas where operational and clinical teams are collaborating, communicating, sharing knowledge, their processes every day. Core health systems are great for your structured data, and there's a lot of focus and importance on that. But there is a massive volume of unstructured, fluid, collaborative data that are living in inboxes, living in Teams chats, living in SharePoint, living in Google Drive. And this is critical stuff, right? Like we've got policy updates, care coordination notes, training documentation. Traditionally, this was viewed as operational, but what we've seen with AI, now there's a push that sees this data as strategic. There were some forward-thinking organizations that could see the knowledge management and see the value. I think in health, because of the EHR discussions, that air was sucked out of the room. But now this is shining a big spotlight on it. And this is where AvePoint comes in. So that kind of data, traditionally, if you want good AI outcomes, garbage in, garbage out, I think everyone's familiar with that. You need data that's clean, secure, well-governed, well-managed, people can only access what they should be accessing, and you have checks and balances and audits in place for that, both for regulatory reasons, but also just so you're getting the most out of your AI. That's a huge challenge to do that at scale across these large fluid volume sets. And that's exactly where AvePoint steps in. So we have the cloud platform that secures, governs, automates, and protects all of that collaborative data.
Okay. So now I have to ask tell me more. I mean, with a lot of things, you can almost say it sounds too good to be true, but I know we have this chronic problem in healthcare. We do have a lot of data in a lot of places, and it's not well organized. And often we don't know that we even have it. And the other problem is, from the security perspective, the other problem is too many people can get their hands on stuff they shouldn't actually be able to get their hands on. Tell me more about how you work with customers to resolve that.
Yeah, you raised a great point there. Like, we have a lot of data in a lot of place. And I think traditional approaches to IT would say, all right, how are we going to clean up this data and bring it into this system? Or AI goes to your data, right? And this is, I think Gartner raised this challenge. There's a new data paradigm that CIOs are facing, particularly in healthcare, but also other regulated industries, is that departments, agencies, individual business units are bringing their own AI applications in. Where is that data coming from and what is it accessing? Obviously, there's some restrictions and things we can do with APIs and other kinds of checks, but there's also a lot of organizational data that is now getting exposed and tapped into, which maybe traditionally the governance wasn't as tight. So like I said, we have a cloud platform that connects to your Microsoft 365, Google, Salesforce, and it helps you go through some processes of things like data discovery, data cleanup. And data cleanup doesn't mean just like deleting or archiving. There's a full governance, retention, lifecycle, records, compliance conversation that goes around that. So understanding sensitivity and retention, and then
the privacy people got to be loving you, and probably the general counsel too.
Excellent. Yeah. That's the space we play in. So I think traditionally there's ways in doing that on structured data, which is great. The magic comes in on the unstructured data, and that's what we're able to bring in.
On the unstructured data, are you looking for particular patterns of words? Are you looking for, I mean, how do you go about, because a lot of our data is unstructured, from notes in the EHR to the stuff that you're talking about in email. How do you look at that?
There's sort of two ways to do it. So the bottom-up approach is more like looking for, like you said, individual words or patterns, things like PHI, PII, other kinds of sensitive protected data that maybe at a file level, we want to find, tag, categorize, and then have some sort of operational action that happens over the top. What's unique about these collaborative systems like M365 or Google Workspace is we can actually also take a kind of, I don't want to say top-down approach, but there's also a workspace level approach you can take too, which is very unique to these systems. You don't have to go through and look through 30 million documents for everything, although that's a perfectly fine approach that we do help with. But you have an opportunity to manage at a container level as well. So we can look at an individual team or an individual SharePoint site and say, well, understand the membership, understand the kind of content that's supposed to be in there, understand the business context, and then we can start applying some governance rules around who should be accessing it, what apps can access it, and so on and so forth. And that can then filter down as well. So you've kind of got this two-layered approach, which depending on your initiatives in terms of speed or control or visibility, you can attack it from all angles.
And is there an agent that goes on like for every user on every machine? How does it work?
Yeah, that's right. Because
I probably should ask that question too.
What was that, CIO in recovery? Was that what I saw in the
recovering CIO? So I've been a CIO most of my career, and then I was an independent consultant for a number of years, and then I worked for CrowdStrike for 3 years as executive healthcare strategist. So I'm always interested in kind of like under the covers. So how does this work? I mean, it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it's a cloud platform. It's hosted in Azure. To talk shop, it's a GCC High, or IL5, all that kind of stuff, FedRamped.
Yeah, IL5, great. Holy cow, really? So you're doing are you doing a bunch of work with the government? This is really good stuff to think about. I probably don't even need to tell you this, but as you talk to healthcare systems, like having that conversation about IL5, and it means this. And so we do work with classified systems in the government, makes CISOs feel way more comfortable with like, okay, these guys are cool, let's go ahead. And so
you're right. You're building a bridge between the two systems, and essentially we cut our teeth programming SharePoint APIs 20 years ago. Like 2001, I think, was the first edition of our software with SharePoint 2001. So we've been doing this a long time. We're connected directly with Microsoft and Google product heads. Like, we know how to manage unstructured data. So essentially that platform has a collection of different modules of capabilities, and one that will uncover data and help you discover your redundant, obsolete, trivial, and then rules around actioning it. We have one that's purely security focused that will, like a DSPM, right, will surface all your overshared information. But we also have other tools that resolve that and put policies in place that say, okay, well, Drex is in this site and he's an owner of this site, so he has full permission to do whatever he wants. That's fine. But now Drex is trying to add an external user in, but we know he shouldn't be doing that in this kind of site. So we're going to stop that from happening. So even though you technically have the permissions, this will come in and override it and say, no, don't do that. And then let someone know that you've done that.
Interesting too. So when you're talking to somebody of a particular age and you're talking about SharePoint and your experience with SharePoint, like all these things that you're talking about were all the things that drove everybody completely crazy about SharePoint.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get,
Yeah.
data duplication? And well, now we got it in
Oh,
5 places, and which one's the right version and
yep.
all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So,
So,
it's
and that's where
interesting
we
your
come from.
background has kind of led you into this path.
When we say that, often people jump to that, the health records and the medical records, kinds of the Epics and the Cerners, and we have to sort of back that conversation out and say, no, that's not the space that we play. We play in this space over here. And I think it's been getting more and more spotlight now because of what AI is doing. So that's why this is a super critical conversation.
The stuff around SharePoint too. Not just SharePoint, but now we are where we are today. It rings true though. Back in the day, parts of the organization who couldn't get money to buy apps would basically build apps in SharePoint and become completely dependent on that thing not breaking. It has to work exactly like this. And nobody knew about it until that person left and then something needed to change. And I feel like we're back to the future sometimes with the AI stuff and the other things that we're doing right now. All the tools now that are cloud-based tools that are like somebody in the organization learned how to do something with it. And now that business or clinical team is completely dependent on that thing. And it wasn't something that was sanctioned. It just kind of happened.
Exactly what you said. I'm getting flashbacks to like InfoPath and all that kind of stuff back in the day. You think about that with Power Platform today, there was still a little bit of a barrier to entry. Now there's almost no barrier to entry. Anyone can just talk to Copilot now and say, oh, I want to do this. Or it had something called, I don't know, did you see Copilot Actions? I think they just, I think they just renamed it to something else now, but essentially it's a template now, and you can just fill in the blanks and it says, all right, I'm a project manager and I want to message these 5 people once a week before Friday and send a follow-up. And then it just goes off and starts chatting with these people on your behalf. It pings them in Teams and like you and says, hey, this is Tim and like Drex to give me the update on this project status, and compiles it all. But you can just point and click and talk to it now, and it builds the workflow and the app and all the integrations and everything's done for you. So if we were worried about InfoPath and Power Apps before, it's about to get a whole lot more.
Vibe coding is definitely a thing, right? People are just making it up on the fly. They're not technically capable of understanding the unintended consequences of this thing that they're building too, which is also concerning. How you help them manage that
Absolutely.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why knowing what is it trying to do, what data is it accessing, is it supposed to be writing to this data? Yes, 100%. 100%. That's the space that we play.
We have this webinar that's coming up, and we'll put a note in the comments where you can go and register and hear the rest of the story. When you go out and visit with customers, because I know you're out all the time talking to health systems, when you sit down with them, what is the conversation that you're usually hoping to have? What are some of the questions that you ask as a consultant that pulls the right information out that helps you understand how and why you can help them?
First of all, we want to understand how are they leveraging the different content repositories for their AI initiatives today. So what are the goal of their AI initiatives? So I'm a Microsoft Copilot MVP. So there's great things you can do with Copilot, like take policy and procedure documents and instantly click and turn them into FAQs for training with your team, or being able to interact and ask questions with policy documents. Am I allowed to be doing this? And it will question the policy document and let you know. There's some really great applications, but understanding, okay, which of those are touching your unstructured data and how comfortable do you feel about this? Are you having any roadblocks to your Gen AI rollouts? Again, to quote Gartner, they're saying still the number one obstacle to AI implementations is weak information governance. So there's different areas where governance can fall down. Most organizations are at some different level of maturity on that journey, some high, some low, some in different areas. So trying to understand, how do you feel comfortable about the visibility and control of your unstructured data today? How are you ensuring sensitive data isn't leaking out? Have you just switched everything off because you're not sure? Or
Right.
which, it's an answer, but it's not necessarily the most productive answer. And if not, what's holding you back? And trying to understand what's lacking so we can help fill the missing piece.
When you talk to folks in the field, do you find people that feel like they're just sort of frozen? Like
Yeah.
there's so many decisions to make. Governance seems so overwhelming. We've never done it here, or we've only done a little bit of it here. And it's super complicated. And I don't have an army of people to do that. Do you find people
Yeah.
who are just, I don't even know where to go? You
We
help with that?
do. Absolutely. And that's why we're still having this conversation today, because the frameworks and best practices of how you inventory, classify, manage, and then operationalize or automate your governance strategy. The approach to that, the best practices have been the same for the last 20 years, right? The technology changes, of course, but the approach is the same. I think, like you said, a lot of people are frozen. They sort of kick the can down the road. It's that Eisenhower matrix of it's important, but not critical or
Right.
not urgent. Sorry. It's exactly that. But what's happened is AI's made it urgent now. Like, hey, if we want to take advantage of this new technology and not fall behind from our peers and make sure we're doing it safely and responsibly, we have to get our house in order now. So yeah, absolutely, we see that.
How big of a deal is change in this whole conversation? Because for a lot of places, this AI discussion is still a little scary. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do with it. Like you said, there's a lot of places that they're just blocking sites. And the problem is that on Wednesday, when you open up that software as a service app, there's a new button that
Yeah.
didn't exist and nobody knew about it. And suddenly there's AI built into that application. So change is a tough part of this. Are you guys involved in the whole change management process?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a huge part of it, understanding where the organizations are struggling with change. And one of the things that we're able to help with is we do have tools that provide visibility into adoption and usage as well. So one of the big areas is, well, I don't know where to get started on my data. Where is my data? Where is the stuff that's getting used a lot? Getting that visibility, number one, will not only show you where you need to focus and prioritize your efforts, but also help you tackle the change management question about, okay, who are going to be our early adopters? Who are going to be our champions? In fact, we can pull up a dashboard of who's most likely to convert, like who's most likely to be an early adopter based on their usage patterns of other M365 software.
Uh-huh.
Right? If you've got
So,
someone that just lives in their inbox all day, maybe they're not ready to move. But if you've got someone who's a cross section of inbox and Teams and is using some of the early adoption features, that might be a
yeah,
good
now
candidate.
you found yourself a citizen data scientist who might want to go
Exactly.
first, right? That's cool.
Exactly. Part of that is that when it comes to that data security and data protection, a big part is making it everyone's responsibility. So talking about the change management, it's not just on IT's shoulders to understand what all the data is and what's sensitive and what's not. You need to bring your business users, all of your staff into this discussion as well. And that's, again, something that we help with, but it does require that change management to make people understand why it's important, why they do need to be tagging things. And ideally, you want to get out of the user's way as much as possible. You want to make it as easy for them to do the right thing. But sometimes it does need a little bit of change.
It really gives managers and directors and vice presidents more of a superpower, right? They've got access to all of this data. They're able to do the kind of amazing things that you want to do with this data. And sometimes until you start to do that kind of work, you don't actually realize the kinds of questions you can ask to make
Yes.
your job easier, to make care safer for patients and families.
You've raised a very good point, because unlike some tools or solutions where it's forced into your workflow and then you have to use this new, like a new version of Outlook drops. You've got no choice but to use the new version of Outlook usually, right? But when it comes to different AI applications, you kind of have to go to it, right? You have to ask the right questions and have to want to do it and have to get familiar with it. So in terms of the adoption of the AI application itself, there is a change uplift there. And the way to tackle that is understanding your audience and what and how data they're using, and giving them key use cases and examples, as well as local champions they can look to for advice.
Users teaching other users how to get better with the data
Yes.
has always been a big part of this too.
Arm's length support, you know.
Right. Become the consultant and let them help each other. That's a great strategy. Hey, I really appreciate the time today. I've learned a lot. I can't wait for the webinar. I'm going to learn a ton more there, but hopefully the audience will too. Tim Boettcher, Senior Vice President, Go to Market for AvePoint. Appreciate you being on today.
Thank you for having me. I really love this chat. It was fantastic.
Thanks. If you found this conversation valuable, don't miss the upcoming webinar on June 12th, where Tim and I and a couple of other folks will dive deeper into responsible AI implementation in healthcare. We'll explore data governance strategies that balance innovation with security and compliance. Want to learn more about this and other cutting-edge healthcare IT topics? Head over to thisweekhealth.com and watch for the pop-up to register.